Hi, everybody. I'm going to talk about Living Like Weasels, the piece by Annie Dillard that inspires us when we're thinking about how to essays. For essay three, we're focused on the idea of um, how to explain a process, either so that somebody else can do it themselves, like advice on how to do it, or so that we can appreciate the nature of that process. And both the Annie Dillard piece and the next video, which will be about Going Places by Jim Harrison, are really built around more advanced writing, more complex style, more sophisticated sentence structure, and they also do some more sophisticated things in terms of rhetorical moves as a writer. And I want to highlight some of those. And instead of doing it live in a Zoom, I thought it'd make more sense to make a screencast, kind of talking my way through the reading. Some of it I'll repeat myself, but some of it I hope to uh, highlight some things that I think are really interesting. Um, Her opening that she uses is a intense description. It's one of the grabber strategies we talked about. It's literally a a movie scene of a weasel, a very unusual animal to pick for this discussion. But she also uses a question, so she's kind of blending two of the strategies we talked about: a question that is not easy to answer, a question that uh, truly makes us wonder, and then this description to get us into the moment. So, um, a weasel is wild, and that's how she opens. Who knows what he thinks? He sleeps in his underground den, his tail draped over his nose. His tail draped over his nose is a absolute phrase. Um, that's a sentence structure that we've talked about in class. It is a non-essential. That's why there's a comma in between den and his. And he sleeps in his underground den is the complete thought. His tail draped over his nose. His tail is a part of that subject, a part of the weasel. When I taught this in class, I said my sentence was the teacher was mad. His voice raising, his eyes bulging, his fist swinging, whatever it was. That kind of intense description you can emulate in your own work. Um, she continues with this intense description, um, and the very style of the sentences draw us in to this sense of um, intensity. Sometimes he lives in his den for 2 days without leaving. Outside he stalks, and she gives us an intense list: rabbits, mice, muskrats, and birds, killing more bodies than he can eat warm, and often dragging the carcasses home. So two participles that really capture the wildness of this little creature. Obedient to instinct, he bites his prey at the neck, either splitting the jugular vein at the throat or crunching the brain at the base of the skull, and he does not let go. Um, Again, two participles that build on this description of this intensely wild little animal. And then she's got an anecdote. So this would be research. Of course, she's not writing in a first year composition class, so she doesn't have to cite it in the same way. It's not a academic setting. But this famous naturalist, Ernest Thompson Seton, tells this story about this eagle who was that had a dead weasel dangling from its feathered throat. In fact, he says, was the whole weasel still attached to his feathered throat, a fur pendant. So this weasel um, had bit an eagle, and the eagle killed it, but the tenacity of the weasel led it to continue to bite onto this eagle. Um, and she describes it as a fur pendant. A pendant is a necklace, something you would something of beauty you would put on to be beautiful. So it's very unique, um, a positive structure that she's using there to describe the eagle, and to do it with that metaphor, a fur pendant. Um, I've been reading about weasels because I saw one last week. I started a weasel who startled me, and we exchanged a long glance. So now Dillard is moving into the main body of her piece, and she spends a lot of time on the setting. So if we look at this piece, she spends all this time on the setting from here all the way to here is where she saw this weasel. And I've often asked students in face-to-face classes, why did she spend all this time on this description? And if you really look at the description, it's not a wild, bizarre place that she goes to. It's a shallow little pond, probably created when the highway was made for water runoff. Uh, it's 2 acres near a creek, and um, in the winter, there are cows that stand out on the ice. So this isn't certainly some so pristine wilderness environment. And I think that's the point of what she does with her setting. This is a moment that we can all have. We can all go somewhere and have an experience like this, have an interaction with the natural world that can teach us something deep and meaningful. And that's Dillard's thing: interactions with the natural world and how they can teach us things that are deep and meaningful. Um, so I want you to think about how you can do these same things in your own work. Okay, so you may not write about weasels, but maybe we can learn something from cats, or we can learn something from dogs, or birds, or trees, or children, or grandparents, or I once had a student write about he grew up in an urban setting, and he literally grew up around people who were in gangs, and he wrote, live like a gangster, and tried to find some deep meaning in that other people didn't see. And he did it in the same exact way. He had a powerful description, he had an anecdote, and then he had a setting of where you would run into this thing. Our next part is an actual description of the thing, right? Of the weasel. He was 10 inches long, thin as a curve, a muscled ribbon, brown as fruit wood, soft furred, alert. I love the listing that she does. Some of it a positive in nature, some of it just single adjectives. A muscled ribbon. That's a great description of a weasel. If you've never seen a weasel, they are a ribbon of a little animal. There is not much to them. My computer's freezing up here for a second. There's not much to them. They're small, and they definitely are. Um, to call one a muscled ribbon is really capturing the sense of intensity and viciousness. Very vivid description. Um, so she sees this weasel. She describes it intensely, and and then she describes this moment where they actually look at each other. Um, this this intense exchange. Our look was as if two lovers or deadly enemies met unexpectedly on an overgrown path when each had been thinking of something else. A clearing blow to the gut. It was also a bright blow to the brain, or a sudden beating of brains, with all the charge and intimate grate of rubbed balloons. Ooh, just listen to that, rub balloons, or that kind of static energy there that also makes you cringe. Um, it emptied our lungs. It felled the forest, moved the fields, and drained the pond. So those aren't literal descriptions. Those things didn't literally happen, but she's describing almost a moment where everything else falls away and all she has is this connection with this creature. Um, so she spends a lot of time describing it in vivid and intense ways. Um, that's Annie Dillard's style, and it can also be yours. When you write a how essay that is built around trying to be like something else, that description of the something else needs to be part of how you move us to thinking. Um, if you want to say we should all live like a cat, your description of the cat needs to replace our own experience with it. Dillard is trying to get us to feel, know, and believe what she felt and now knows and believes because she had this exchange. And her writing has to do it for us where the experience did it for her. And that's the challenge. That's what writing is about. Um, the end of the essay is the how of the essay, which is how to live. Right? This weasel suggested to her a different way to live. I would like to learn or remember how to live. Um, and she says this isn't literal, and I love that because I've often had students say, "Well, we can't live like weasels. I'm not going to crawl in a hole. I'm not going to eat little rodents and frogs." She says, "I don't think I can learn from a wild animal how to live in particular. Shall I suck warm blood, hold my tail high, walk with my footprints precisely over the prints of my hands? But I might learn something of mindlessness, something of the purity of living in the physical sense and the dignity of living without bias or motive." Um, Certainly, that is something that we could do more of, live without bias or motive. And she sees in the weasel that characteristic, that quality that we could learn from. The weasel lives in necessity, and we live in choice, hating necessity and dying at the last ignobly in its talons. A weasel doesn't choose to be vicious. It doesn't choose to do what it does it by instinct. And too often we don't follow our instincts. We don't sleep when we're tired or eat where we're hungry, but instead make other choices that we often hate. I would like to live as I should, as the weasel lives as he should. And I suspect that for me, the way is like the weasel's, open to time and death painlessly, noticing everything, remembering nothing, choosing the given with a fierce and pointed will. So as we're reading this piece, realize that this isn't about a weasel anymore, but instead, Dillard trying to suggest to us some deeper truths about life, its nature, how to exist in this world in the time that we have. And if you read any more of Dillard's work, it all revolves around that. And this motif of recognizing something in the natural world that we can learn from, we'll see again and again and again in her work. I missed my chance. I should have gone for the throat. I should have lunged for that streak of white under the weasel's chin and held on through mud and into the wild rose, held on for a dearer life. We could live under the wild rose as weasels, mute and uncomprehending. I could very calmly go wild. Oh, look at that juxtaposition there, right? Calmly go wild. I could live 2 days in the den, curled, leaning on mouse fur, sniffing bird bones, blinking, licking, breathing musk. Huh! All of those repeated participles, things I've taught my class. You can do this. My hair tangled in the roots of grasses. There's that absolute phrase. My hair was tangled without was. It's an incomplete thought. Down is a good place to go where the mind is single. Down is out of your ever loving mind and back to your careless senses. I remember muteness as a prolonged and giddy fast, where every moment is a feast of utterance received. So she's really talking about a reconnection to a physical experience, the simplistic nature of that, and how we don't do those things. We could, we can live any way we want. People take vows of poverty, chastity, obedience, even of silence by choice. The thing is to stalk your calling in a certain skilled and supple way, to locate the most tender and live spot and plug into that pulse. So the thing, life, the key is to stalk your work, what moves you, what you're passionate about, what matters, like a weasel stalks its prey. And this is not a fight. This isn't violence. When the weasel kills something, it's yielding to what a weasel is. And this she says this is yielding, not fighting. A weasel doesn't attack anything. A weasel lives as he's meant to, yielding at every moment to the perfect freedom of single necessity. So her conclusion is a great exploration of implications, right? If we lived out like this, what would happen? Um, what would we be able to achieve? So this inspires for you many ways to think about how to live. And of course, you're not going to pick a weasel as your subject, but there are many um, examples. So other animals you could think about. You could think about other types of people. You could think about inanimate objects. You could think about digital spaces. How does the world and the way the characteristics of other things suggest advice for us of how to live or how to be? Um, my daughter, we were at a hockey game, and my daughter made a comment about how mean hockey players must be because of the way they play on the ice and the cheap shots and the fights. I mean, hockey is a violent sport, and then I said, you know what? We're gonna when we get home, we're gonna bring up a lot of interviews of hockey players, and invariably, hockey players are polite, they're calm, they're not bombastic, they're not obnoxious. I mean, there's a few out there, but very much different from other sports. And um, and she said to me, she goes, hockey players are. She didn't say live, but she meant live right in that they put their passion and energy and even their violence into the game, but then can step away from that and be good people off the ice. And I thought that was pretty insightful for a 10-year-old to say something like that. And it made me think of this essay because I'm an English teacher and I got problems like that. Um, that that you could, if you were really into hockey and really into that sport, you could talk about how it's a way to think about living. So consider your lived lives, consider the things you know really well, and how do they inspire or invite a philosophy? Because philosophy is a way of life. That's what philosophy is. It's a way to live. How should we live? And it can be very evocative. So I wish you the best of luck. If you have questions about the reading or comments, you can put them in the comment section of the video, or you can put stuff where I post it in Classroom. You can make comments as well. But good luck with working with Dillard's piece and how she can inspire your own writing.